The blood-stained telegram trembled in Yates Xander's calloused hands as he stood on the porch of his ranch house, the setting sun casting long shadows across the Wyoming territory. The year was 1878, and everything he'd ever loved had just been ripped away from him with a few hastily scrawled words. His wife, Margaret, was dead. The stagecoach carrying her back from visiting her sister in Denver had been ambushed by bandits. No survivors. Just like that, the woman who had filled his world with light for 8 years was gone, leaving him alone with their 2 young children. Yates folded the telegram carefully, tucking it into his vest pocket before stepping inside. The ranch house felt eerily quiet despite the presence of his children. 6-year-old Thomas sat at the kitchen table, pushing beans around his plate without eating them. 4-year-old Sarah clung to her rag doll in the corner, her small face pinched with confusion and fear. "Pa?" Thomas looked up, his eyes searching his father's face for answers. "When's Ma coming home?" The question hit Yates like a physical blow. How could he tell them? How could he find the words to explain that their mother would never again braid Sarah's hair or teach Thomas to read from the family Bible? "Your mother." Yates cleared his throat, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Your mother won't be coming home, son." "But she promised," Sarah whispered, clutching her doll tighter. "Ma promised she'd bring me ribbon for my hair." Yates knelt beside his daughter, trying to find comfort in the familiar scent of her hair, but all he could think about was how much she looked like Margaret. "There's been an accident, little one. Ma's gone to heaven to be with the angels." The children didn't cry, not then. Perhaps they were too young to fully understand what death meant. But in the days that followed, as the reality of their mother's absence settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, Yates watched the light fade from his children's eyes, just as it had from his own. The ranch hands whispered among themselves about the change that had come over the Xander family. Yates had never been a particularly expressive man, but now he moved about like a ghost, doing what needed to be done with mechanical precision. The children, once full of laughter and mischief, grew quiet and withdrawn. Yates knew he was failing them. Each night, after putting them to bed with awkward, stilted tenderness, he would sit on the porch with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the vast Wyoming wilderness and wondering how he was supposed to go on. 2 months after Margaret's death, a wagon came rumbling up the dirt road to the ranch house. Yates narrowed his eyes against the setting sun, trying to make out the figure holding the reins. It wasn't one of his men. They were all out moving cattle to the north pasture. As the wagon drew closer, he realized it was a woman. She pulled the team of horses to a stop in front of the house and set the brake with practiced ease. "Mr. Xander?" she called, climbing down from the wagon seat. "I'm Olivia Turner. I believe you advertised for a housekeeper?" Yates frowned. He'd placed an advertisement in the paper in Cheyenne weeks ago, but had given up hope of finding someone willing to come all the way out to his remote ranch. "That was some time back," he said gruffly. The woman Olivia approached the porch steps. She wasn't young, but neither was she old, perhaps in her late 20s. She wore a simple blue dress, dusty from the road, and her chestnut hair was neatly pinned beneath a practical bonnet. Her face was pleasant rather than beautiful, but her eyes, warm brown and direct, met his without hesitation. "I only saw the notice last week," she explained. "I came as soon as I could make arrangements. If the position is still available, I'd like to apply." Yates studied her skeptically. "It's hard work. Cooking, cleaning, minding the children. And we're 15 miles from town." Olivia smiled slightly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Xander. And I'm quite accustomed to isolation. I grew up on a homestead in Nebraska." Before Yates could respond, the front door creaked open and Thomas peered out, followed closely by Sarah. "Who are you?" Thomas asked bluntly, staring at the stranger. "I'm Miss Turner," Olivia said, her tone softening as she addressed the children. And you must be Thomas and Sarah. Sarah's eyes widened. How do you know our names? Your father's advertisement mentioned he had 2 children, Olivia explained, then reached into a pocket of her dress. I brought something for you both. Would you like to see? The children looked to their father, who gave a short nod. Olivia produced 2 small cloth-wrapped bundles and handed one to each child. Thomas unwrapped his to find a small carved wooden horse, while Sarah discovered a tiny corn husk doll. Did you make these? Thomas asked, turning the horse over in his hands. I did, Olivia confirmed. On the journey here, I thought you might like them. Sarah said nothing, but she held the doll close, examining its woven dress with fascination. Yates watched the interaction with conflicted emotions. The children needed a woman's care, that much was clear. But bringing a stranger into their home, someone to take Margaret's place in the daily running of the household, it felt like another kind of betrayal. You can stay the night, he said finally. We'll talk terms in the morning. The bunkhouse is... Mr. Xander, Olivia interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. If I'm to care for your children, I should stay in the house. It wouldn't be proper otherwise. Yates frowned. She was right, of course, but the thought of a woman sleeping under his roof, in the spare room where Margaret had kept her sewing things, made his chest tight with grief. Fine, he said curtly. Thomas, show Miss Turner to the spare room. I need to check on the stock before dark. Without waiting for a response, Yates strode off toward the barn, needing to escape the unexpected complication this woman presented. He'd wanted a housekeeper, yes, but now that one had arrived bringing small gifts and kind smiles to his children, he wasn't sure he could bear the disruption to the numb routine he'd established. In the barn, Yates leaned against his favorite gelding's stall, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and horses. What do you think, Rusty? He murmured, reaching out to stroke the horse's velvety nose. Am I making a mistake? The horse nickered softly, pushing against his hand. Yeah, Yates sighed. But the children need someone. I sure as hell don't know what I'm doing with them anymore. When he finally returned to the house, the smell of cooking food greeted him, real cooking, not the basic fare he'd been managing to put together for the past 2 months. Following the aroma to the kitchen, he found Olivia at the stove, stirring a pot of what smelled like beef stew. The table was set for 4, and to his shock, Thomas was helping, carefully placing forks beside each plate. Pa! Sarah exclaimed when she saw him. She was sitting on a chair dragged over to the counter, using a wooden spoon to stir something in a bowl. Miss Turner is teaching me to make biscuits. Yates stood frozen in the doorway. Sarah hadn't spoken with such animation since before Margaret died. Dinner will be ready shortly, Mr. Xander, Olivia said, glancing over her shoulder. I hope you don't mind that we started without you. The children were hungry. No, that's fine. He moved to the wash basin and began scrubbing his hands, feeling strangely like a visitor in his own home. Dinner was a revelation. Not only was the food better than anything they'd eaten in months, but the children actually talked. Thomas told Olivia about his pony, and Sarah explained the names of all her dolls. Yates remained largely silent, watching this transformation with a mixture of relief and unease. After the children were in bed, Olivia joined Yates on the porch, where he had retreated with his customary glass of whiskey. Your children are wonderful, Mr. Xander, she said, settling into the chair beside his. But they're hurting deeply. Yates stared out at the darkness. I know. They've lost their mother. They shouldn't have to lose their father, too. His head snapped toward her, anger flaring. I'm right here. Olivia met his gaze steadily. Are you? Because from what I can see, you're as absent as if you'd ridden away. Yates set his glass down with a thud. You have no right to speak to me that way. You know nothing about my family or what we've lost. I know grief, Mr. Xander, she replied quietly. I know it can swallow a person whole if they let it. But those children need more than a ghost going through the motions. He stood abruptly. You've been here less than a day. Don't presume to tell me how to raise my children. I'm not presuming anything. I'm observing. And I'm offering to help not just with cooking and cleaning, but with bringing some life back into this house. She rose as well, her expression softening. They need to laugh again, Mr. Xander. So do you. Yates turned away, unable to bear the compassion in her eyes. The job is yours if you want it. $10 a month, room and board. Sundays off if you want them. Thank you, she said simply. I'll stay. Good night, Mr. Xander. He didn't respond, and after a moment, he heard the door open and close as she went inside. Alone again, Yates picked up his whiskey, drained it, and poured another. The conversation had left him unsettled, defensive. Who was this woman to waltz into his home and tell him he was failing his children? The worst part was, she was right. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect late summer day in Wyoming. Yates rose before the sun as always, dressing quietly in the darkness of his room. When he reached the kitchen, he was surprised to find Olivia already there, stoking the cook stove to life. You're up early, he commented, reaching for the coffee pot. Farm habits, she replied with a small smile. The rooster doesn't care if you're tired. There was something about the simple domesticity of the moment, the woman at the stove, the smell of coffee brewing that made Yates's chest ache with memory. He busied himself with pouring water into the wash basin, scrubbing his face perhaps more vigorously than necessary. I thought I might take the children into town today, Olivia said as she mixed batter for hotcakes. They need a few things. Sarah's outgrowing her shoes, and Thomas could use some new shirts. Yates frowned, drying his face on a towel. Town's a long way. I don't mind the drive, and I think it would do them good to get away from the ranch for a day. He wanted to object, but couldn't think of a reasonable argument. The children did need things, and he'd been putting off the trip. The thought of entering the general store where Margaret had once chatted happily with the shopkeeper's wife, of seeing the pitying looks from the townsfolk, it was more than he could bear. Take my wagon, he said finally. It's more comfortable than yours, and there's money in the tin on the mantel. Olivia nodded, flipping a hot cake with practiced ease. Thank you. We'll be back before dark. True to her word, the wagon returned just as the sun was setting, rolling up to the house accompanied by the sound of Yates could scarcely believe it laughter. Sarah was giggling, her small face animated as she clutched a paper-wrapped package to her chest. Thomas was smiling too, saying something to Olivia that made her throw her head back in genuine amusement. Yates stepped out onto the porch, watching as Olivia set the brake and helped the children down from the high seat. All three were wind-blown and sun-kissed, looking as if they'd had a proper adventure rather than a simple trip to town for supplies. Pa! Sarah called, running toward him with her package. Miss Turner got me new shoes, red ones, and ribbons for my hair. Is that so? Yates managed, glancing at Olivia, who was unloading other parcels from the back of the wagon. Let's see them then. Sarah unwrapped her treasures, holding up shiny red leather shoes and several lengths of brightly colored ribbon. Miss Turner says I can wear the blue ribbon tomorrow if I let her braid my hair. That sounds nice, Yates said, his throat tightening at the sight of his daughter's excitement and emotion he hadn't seen from her in far too long. Thomas approached more sedately, carrying a small stack of books. Miss Turner found these at the mercantile, Pa. Stories about cowboys and explorers. She says she'll help me read them. Yates looked past his children to Olivia, who was watching the interaction with quiet satisfaction. Sounds like you had quite a day. The children were wonderful company, she replied, lifting the last of the packages. We found everything we needed and had time for ice cream at Mrs. Peterson's cafe. Ice cream! Sarah exclaimed. It was vanilla with maple syrup drizzled on top. And Mrs. Peterson gave us extra because she said we were the politest children she'd seen all week, Thomas added proudly. That night, after the children were tucked in bed, surrounded by their new treasures, Yates again found himself on the porch with Olivia. This time, he offered her a cup of coffee, which she accepted with a grateful smile. "Thank you for today," he said stiffly. "I haven't seen them that happy in a long time." Olivia blew on her coffee before taking a sip. "Children are resilient, Mr. Xander. They need to be allowed to find joy again, even in the midst of grief." "You speak like someone who knows," he observed. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the star-filled sky. "I was married once. Very briefly. He died of typhoid fever less than a year after our wedding." "I'm sorry," Yates said, genuinely meaning it. "It was a long time ago. I was only 20. She offered a small, sad smile. "I thought my life was over, but it wasn't. It was just different than I had planned." Yates considered her words, turning them over in his mind like smooth stones. "Did you ever think about marrying again?" "At first, no. It seemed impossible to imagine loving someone else." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Later, I was open to the idea, but the right opportunity never presented itself. I moved around a lot, taking positions as a teacher or housekeeper. It's not a life conducive to courtship. And now you're here, in the middle of nowhere, with a broken family." Olivia looked at him directly. "I don't see a broken family, Mr. Xander. I see a family that's hurting, yes, but still whole. Still capable of healing." Yates didn't know how to respond to that. The concept of healing seemed as distant and unreachable as the stars overhead. Instead, he changed the subject. "The children start school soon. It's a small schoolhouse, about 5 miles from here. I've been driving them in the wagon, but with winter coming—" "I could take them," Olivia offered. "I was a school teacher in Nebraska for 3 years. I could even help them with their lessons." "That would be helpful," Yates acknowledged. "Thomas struggles with his reading." They lapsed into silence, but it was more comfortable than the previous night's tension. As Yates listened to the familiar nighttime sounds of the prairie crickets chirping, the occasional lowing of cattle in the distant pasture, he felt something loosen slightly in his chest. Not healing, perhaps, but a tiny crack in the wall he'd built around his grief. The days settled into a new rhythm. Olivia brought order back to the household with quiet efficiency. Meals appeared on time, clothes were washed and mended, and the house began to feel lived in again rather than merely inhabited. The children responded to her gentle guidance, performing small chores without complaint and showing a renewed interest in their surroundings. Yates watched this transformation from a distance, still unable to fully engage. He worked from sunrise to sunset, pushing himself and his men hard as they prepared for the coming winter. It was easier to exhaust himself physically than to face the emotional demands of family life. But even as he tried to maintain his isolation, Olivia was slowly drawing him back into the circle of his own home. It started with small things, questions about the children's routines that required his input, discussions about supplies needed for the household, casual mentions of funny things Thomas or Sarah had said or done that day. One evening in late September, Yates returned from a long day of mending fences to find Olivia and the children in the yard behind the house. They had spread a blanket on the grass and were looking at something Olivia held in her hands. "Pa!" Sarah called when she spotted him. "Come see what Miss Turner found." Reluctantly, Yates approached the group, nodding a greeting to Olivia. "It's a baby rabbit," Thomas explained, pointing to the tiny creature nestled in Olivia's palms. "Its mother got caught by a coyote," Miss Turner says, "but this little one got away. We're going to take care of it until it's big enough to live on its own," Sarah declared with the absolute conviction of a 4-year-old. Yates raised an eyebrow at Olivia. "Is that so?" "With your permission, of course," Olivia said, her eyes twinkling. "The children have promised to be responsible, and it would be good for them to learn about caring for another creature." "Please, Pa," Thomas pleaded. "We'll do all the work. You won't have to do anything." Yates looked at his son's eager face, then at Sarah, who was gently stroking the rabbit's tiny head with one finger. They looked so normal, like children should look. Interested, engaged, full of purpose. "All right," he conceded, "but when it's grown, it goes back to the wild where it belongs." The children cheered, and even Olivia smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her face and made Yates suddenly aware of how handsome she was when animated by happiness. "Thank you," she mouthed silently over the children's heads. That night, for the first time in months, Yates joined his family at the table for more than just the mechanical act of eating. He listened as Thomas and Sarah debated names for the rabbit, offering occasional suggestions of his own. He found himself watching Olivia the way she gently guided the conversation, ensuring both children had equal say, the genuine interest she showed in their ideas. "What do you think, Mr. Xander?" she asked, catching him observing her. "Should the rabbit be called Thumper or Hoppy?" "Neither," he said, surprising himself with a small smile. "If you're asking me, I'd call him Lucky." Sarah's eyes widened. "Because he was lucky to get away from the coyote?" "That," Yates agreed, "and lucky to have found people who care enough to help him." Olivia's eyes met his across the table, something warm and approving in her gaze that made Yates look quickly away, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar feeling it stirred in him. Later, as he sat on the porch with his customary glass of whiskey, he realized he'd taken less than usual, the numbing effect not as necessary as it had been. The door opened and Olivia joined him, carrying her own cup of what smelled like herbal tea. "The rabbit is settled in a box in the kitchen," she reported, sitting in the chair beside his. "Thomas insisted on putting one of his shirts in for bedding." "He'll be heartbroken when it's time to let it go," Yates warned. "Perhaps," Olivia agreed, "but he'll learn something valuable about love and caring even for those we can't keep." Yates glanced at her sharply, wondering if there was a deeper meaning to her words, but her expression was serene, revealing nothing. "You're good with them," he said after a moment. "Better than I've been." "You've been grieving," Olivia replied gently. "And grief is exhausting. It leaves little energy for anything else." "That's no excuse. They're my children. They needed me, and I—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the magnitude of his failure. "And you were doing the best you could with a broken heart," Olivia finished for him. "Children are more forgiving than we give them credit for, Mr. Xander. They don't need perfection, just presence." Yates sipped his whiskey, considering her words. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple at all," she said, with a soft laugh. "But it is possible. I see it happening already. You're beginning to see them again. Really see them. That's the first step. And the next step? Letting them see you. Not just the strong, silent rancher, but the man who loves them, who grieves with them, who can still find moments of joy despite the pain." Yates stared out at the darkness, absorbing her words. He'd been raised to believe that a man's strength was measured by his stoicism, his ability to shoulder burden without complaint. The idea of allowing his children to witness his vulnerability went against everything he'd been taught. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted quietly. "You already have," Olivia said. "When you named the rabbit Lucky. When you smiled at dinner. Small steps, Mr. Xander. That's all anyone can take." October brought the first frost, painting the grasslands silver in the early mornings. The children started school, and as promised, Olivia drove them each day in the wagon, returning to manage the household and help with their lessons in the evenings. Lucky the rabbit grew rapidly, developing a sleek coat and a mischievous personality. The children had constructed an enclosure in a corner of the kitchen, but the creature often escaped. leading to frantic searches and peals of laughter when he was discovered in unlikely places under the sofa, behind the stove, once even in Yates's boot. These small adventures became the backdrop to a subtle shift in the household's atmosphere. Laughter, once so rare it had seemed like a memory from another life, now erupted regularly. Even Yates found himself chuckling at the rabbit's antics or Thomas's dramatic reenactments of schoolyard events. One evening in mid-October, Yates returned from a trip to the North Pasture to find the house unusually quiet. There was no sign of Olivia or the children inside, and for a moment, an irrational panic seized him. Had they left him? Then he heard a whoop of delight from behind the barn and followed the sound. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Olivia had set up a makeshift target on a hay bale and was teaching the children to shoot a bow and arrow, not a real one, but a child-sized version she must have crafted herself. "That's it, Thomas," she was saying, adjusting the boy's stance. "Draw back slowly, take a breath, and—" The arrow flew, wobbling through the air to land just shy of the target. Thomas's face fell in disappointment. "That was much better than last time," Olivia encouraged. "Remember, Robin Hood wasn't built in a day." "I thought it was Rome," Thomas said, frowning. "Well, Rome wasn't built in a day either," Olivia laughed. "But I doubt the Romans were as good at archery as you're going to be with practice." Sarah, sitting on an upturned bucket and waiting for her turn, spotted Yates first. "Pa, look what Miss Turner made us. Bows and arrows, just like the Indians use." Olivia turned, a momentary flash of uncertainty crossing her features as she met Yates's gaze. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "The children were restless after school, and I thought this might channel their energy." "My pa can shoot a real bow," Thomas informed her proudly. "He learned from White Elk when they made the treaty for grazing rights." Olivia's eyebrows rose in interest. "Is that so? Perhaps your father would like to demonstrate his skill." Three pairs of eyes turned to Yates expectantly. He hesitated, then stepped forward, holding out his hand for Thomas's bow. "It's been some time," he cautioned. The bow was comically small in his hands, but he knocked one of the blunt-tipped arrows and drew back, muscle memory taking over despite the toy-sized equipment. He released, and the arrow hit the center of the target with a satisfying thunk. Sarah clapped her hands in delight, while Thomas gazed at him with newfound respect. "Will you teach me to do that, Pa?" he asked eagerly. Yates glanced at Olivia, who was watching him with a warm, encouraging smile. "Yes. When you're a bit older, I'll teach you with a proper bow." "Promise?" Thomas pressed. "I promise," Yates said, surprising himself with the firm commitment. Later, after the children were in bed, Yates found Olivia at the kitchen table, mending one of Sarah's dresses by the light of an oil lamp. "Thank you for today," he said, pulling out a chair opposite her. They enjoyed it. Olivia looked up from her sewing, the lamplight casting her features in a soft golden glow. "So did you, I think." Yates nodded, unable to deny it. "Where did you learn to make bows like that?" "My father taught me when I was young. He believed girls should know how to survive in the wilderness just as well as boys." A fond smile touched her lips. Mother was scandalized, but she never stopped him from teaching me. "Your parents sound interesting." "They were." Her expression turned wistful. "They had a small homestead in Nebraska. Both gone now, father to pneumonia 5 years ago, mother the following winter. I think she simply couldn't bear to be without him after 40 years together." Yates felt a pang at the thought. "That kind of love is rare." "Yes," Olivia agreed softly. "But worth aspiring to, don't you think?" Their eyes met across the table, and for a brief moment Yates felt a connection that went beyond employer and employee, a shared understanding, perhaps, of loss and loneliness, but also of the enduring power of love. The moment stretched, then broke, as Lucky the rabbit chose that instant to make another escape attempt, darting across the floor and under the table. Both adults startled, then laughed as they bent to look for the furry fugitive. "He's getting bolder," Olivia observed as she reached under a cabinet to retrieve the wriggling creature. "I think he'll be ready for release soon." "The children won't be happy about that," Yates noted. "No," Olivia agreed, gently stroking the rabbit's ears. "But it's what's best for him. Wild things belong in the wild." Her words carried a hint of melancholy that made Yates wonder if she was thinking about more than just the rabbit. There was something untamed about Olivia Turner, too, a spirit that couldn't be contained by convention or expectation. It was one of the things he'd come to admire about her. The thought brought him up short. Admire? When had that happened? When had this woman who'd arrived as a stranger become someone whose opinion he valued, whose presence he looked forward to at the end of each day? "Mr. Xander?" Olivia's voice broke into his thoughts. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," he said quickly, standing up. "Just tired. I should turn in." "Of course. Good night, then." "Good night, Miss Turner." He hesitated at the door, then added, "Olivia." Her smile at the use of her first name stayed with him as he made his way to his bedroom. A small light in the darkness of his thoughts. The following Sunday, Olivia announced her intention to attend church services in town. "Would the children like to come?" she asked at breakfast. The school teacher mentioned they're having a picnic afterward. Thomas and Sarah looked to their father, uncertainty in their expressions. They hadn't been to church since their mother's funeral. Yates felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the thought of sitting in the same pew where he'd once sat with Margaret, of facing the sympathetic glances and well-meaning inquiries from neighbors and townspeople he'd been avoiding for months. "You go ahead," he said, keeping his tone casual. "I've got work to do here." Disappointment flashed across Olivia's face, but she nodded. "Children? Would you like to come with me?" "Will there be other kids at the picnic?" Thomas asked cautiously. "All your schoolmates will be there," Olivia assured him. "And pie, I imagine. Sunday picnics always have pie." That settled it for the children, who rushed off to change into their best clothes. Yates watched them go, torn between relief at having a day to himself and a strange reluctance to be separated from the three people who had, somehow, become the center of his world again. "We'll be back before dark," Olivia said as she gathered her shawl. "Unless you'd like to reconsider?" Yates shook his head. "Another time, perhaps." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Another time." The house felt unnaturally quiet after they left, the silence broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional shuffle of Lucky in his enclosure. Yates tried to focus on his account books, but found his mind wandering. What were they doing now? Had they arrived at the church? Were the children being welcomed? Or were they standing awkwardly at Olivia's side, uncertain of their place? By mid-afternoon, he'd given up any pretense of productivity and was pacing restlessly around the yard when the sound of approaching horses caught his attention. It wasn't Olivia and the children they'd taken the wagon, and this sounded like multiple riders. Yates reached for the rifle he kept by the door, a precaution born of years on the frontier, and stepped onto the porch. 3 riders were approaching, and as they drew closer, he recognized the lead man as Frank Miller, one of the largest cattle ranchers in the territory, and no friend to Yates. "Xander," Miller called as they reined in their horses. "Got a minute?" "What do you want?" "Miller?" Yates kept his tone neutral, but his hand remained near the rifle. Miller dismounted, followed by his 2 companions, hired hands by the look of them, tough men with weathered faces and cold eyes. "Heard you've got yourself a new housekeeper. Pretty little thing from back east, they say." A cold feeling settled in Yates's stomach. "My household arrangements are none of your business." "Maybe not," Miller conceded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But when I see a prime piece of property sitting unworked, it becomes my business. You've been letting things slide, Xander. Word around town is you're drinking too much and neglecting your stock." "My cattle are fine," Yates said tightly. And my land isn't for sale, if that's what you're angling at. Miller shrugged, glancing around the yard with an assessing eye. Everything's for sale at the right price, and with winter coming, you might find yourself in need of cash, especially with 2 young ones to feed and a woman to pay. I appreciate your concern, Yates said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But we're managing just fine. Are you? Miller took a step closer, his voice lowering. Because from what I hear, you haven't been managing at all. Not since your wife passed. Hiding out here, letting your fences fall into disrepair, sending a woman to do your business in town. Yates felt a surge of anger, hot and clarifying. I think you should leave, Miller. Now. Miller held up his hands in mock surrender. Just being neighborly, Xander. But think about my offer. $10,000 for the whole spread land, cattle, buildings. It's more than fair. It's robbery, Yates replied flatly. This land is worth twice that, and you know it. Maybe to a man who's working it properly, Miller said, his friendly facade slipping to reveal the predator beneath. To a broken man who can't even take care of his own children, it's a lifeline. Yates's hand tightened on the rifle, rage boiling up inside him. Get off my property. Miller studied him for a long moment, then nodded to his men. Let's go, boys. Mr. Xander needs time to think about his options. He swung back up onto his horse, then added, Winter's coming, Xander. It gets mighty cold and lonely out here. A man should think about what's best for his family. Yates watched them ride away, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and, though he hated to admit it, fear. Was Miller right? Had he been failing not only as a father but as a rancher as well? The thought of losing the land he and Margaret had worked so hard to build the legacy he'd planned to pass on to Thomas one day was unbearable. He was still standing on the porch, lost in troubled thoughts, when the wagon returned from town. The children jumped down, faces flushed with excitement, while Olivia followed more sedately, a basket over her arm. Pa! Thomas called, running toward him. You should have come. There was a real band playing music, and races for all the kids, and I won a marble shooting contest. And I made a friend, Sarah added, twirling to show off a new ribbon in her hair. Her name is Emily, and she has a cat named Whiskers, and she invited me to come play at her house sometime. Yates forced a smile, trying to push aside the dark thoughts Miller's visit had stirred. That sounds wonderful. Did you save any pie for your old pa? Miss Turner did, Sarah said, pointing to the basket. She saved you the biggest piece of apple because she said it was probably your favorite. Yates looked at Olivia, who was approaching with a slightly embarrassed smile. I hope I presumed correctly, she said. About the apple pie. You did, he confirmed, feeling a rush of warmth at the simple but thoughtful gesture. It was Margaret's favorite too. She used to make it every fall. Instead of the usual pain, the memory brought a bittersweet nostalgia, a recognition that something precious had been lost but not forgotten. Everyone asked after you, Olivia said as they walked into the house together. The Reverend, Mrs. Peterson from the cafe, Mr. Lewis from the bank. They all seemed genuinely concerned. Yates felt a twinge of shame. He'd assumed the townsfolk's interest was mere curiosity or, worse, pity. But perhaps there was real community there, connections he'd severed in his grief that could be rebuilt. Maybe next Sunday, he said, surprising himself with the sincerity of the statement. Olivia's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. I think that would be wonderful. That night, as the children chattered excitedly about their day in town, Yates found himself more present than he had been in months, asking questions, laughing at Thomas's dramatic retelling of his marble victory, admiring the friendship bracelet Emily had made for Sarah. After the children were in bed, he shared Miller's visit with Olivia as they sat on the porch, the night air crisp with the promise of frost. He's trying to intimidate you, Olivia said, indignation coloring her voice. Taking advantage of your grief to steal your land. It's despicable. But not entirely wrong, Yates admitted heavily. I have let things slide. The south fence line needs rebuilding. We're behind on breaking the new horses, and I haven't done a proper count of the herd in weeks. So you'll catch up, Olivia said firmly. You have good men working for you. Ben and Charlie have been keeping things running while you've been recovering. Yates looked at her in surprise. You've spoken with my ranch hands? A hint of color touched Olivia's cheeks. I may have asked a few questions when they come in for meals. I wanted to understand the operation better, to know how I could be most helpful. And what did they tell you? That you're the best boss they've ever had. That the ranch was thriving before your loss. That they believe in you, even if you've lost belief in yourself. She reached out impulsively, her hand covering his where it rested on the arm of the chair. And they're right to believe in you, Yates. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with surprise. I'm not sure their faith is well placed, he said, his voice rough. But I'm going to try to deserve it. Olivia's hand remained on his for a moment longer, warm and reassuring, before she withdrew it with a soft smile. That's all anyone can ask. The next morning, Yates rose before dawn, a sense of purpose driving him that had been absent for too long. He saddled his horse and rode out to inspect the south fence line, making mental notes of the sections that needed immediate attention. By the time he returned for breakfast, he had a plan forming. I'm going to need all hands today, he told Ben, his foreman, as they stood in the barn. South fence can't wait any longer, not with Miller looking for weaknesses. Ben's weathered face broke into a grin. Good to have you back, boss. I'll round up the men. The day passed in a blur of physical labor digging post holes, setting fence posts, stringing wire. It felt good to work alongside his men again, to feel the burn in his muscles and the satisfaction of tangible progress. When Olivia brought lunch out to the work site, her approval was evident in her smile. The children will be disappointed to miss this, she said, as she set out sandwiches and a jug of cold cider. They're quite proud of their father, the rancher. Next time, Yates promised, accepting a sandwich with a nod of thanks. Thomas is old enough to learn some of this work. A boy should know his family's land. He'd like that, Olivia agreed. He talks about taking over the ranch someday, you know. Tells anyone who'll listen that he's going to be the best cattle rancher in Wyoming territory. Pride swelled in Yates's chest at the thought of his son's ambition, an ambition that would have died with the ranch if he'd given in to his grief and allowed Miller to take what wasn't rightfully his. That evening, exhausted but satisfied with the day's work, Yates sat with Thomas on the porch, pointing out constellations in the clear night sky. Sarah had fallen asleep early, worn out from a day of helping Olivia with household chores. Pa? Thomas said after they'd been quiet for a while. Is Miss Turner going to stay with us forever? The question caught Yates off guard. I don't know, son. She came to be our housekeeper. Most housekeepers stay until they find something else. Or get married. Thomas frowned. But we need her. She makes things better. Better how? Yates asked, genuinely curious about his son's perspective. She makes you smile again, Thomas said simply. And she knows how to fix things. Like when Sarah was crying about Ma, Miss Turner didn't just say, "Don't cry." She said it was okay to be sad, and miss Ma, but that Ma would want us to be happy too. And then she told us stories about when she was a little girl and lost her dog, and how she was sad for a long time, but then one day she realized she could remember her dog and be happy about the good times. Yates felt a lump form in his throat. That sounds like good advice. It is, Thomas agreed earnestly, and she makes the best biscuits, and she knows all about stars and animals and history. She's smart like Ma was, but different too. Different how? Thomas considered this, his young face serious in the moonlight. Ma was soft. Miss Turner is strong, like she could survive anything. Yates thought about Olivia's quiet resilience, her practical approach to grief, her unflagging energy. I think you're right about that, son. So can we keep her? Thomas pressed. Maybe you could marry her, and then she'd have to stay. A startled laugh escaped Yates. It doesn't quite work that way, Thomas. Marriage is complicated. Why? You like her, don't you? And she likes you. I can tell. Oh, you can you? Yates ruffled his son's hair affectionately. And how exactly can you tell that? By the way she looks at you when you're not looking, Thomas said with the absolute confidence of childhood. It's the same way Ma used to look at you. Yates fell silent, his son's words stirring something deep inside him, a mixture of guilt and hope, so tangled he couldn't separate one from the other. It's time for bed, he said finally. School tomorrow. Will you think about it, though? Thomas persisted as he stood up. About keeping Miss Turner? I'll think about it, Yates promised, though he wasn't entirely sure what it was offering Olivia a permanent position in their household, or something more personal that he wasn't ready to contemplate. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as Yates threw himself back into the work of the ranch with renewed vigor. He rode out with his men daily, mending fences, moving cattle to winter pastures, preparing the barn and outbuildings for the coming cold. In the evenings, he spent time with his children, reading to them from the books Olivia had purchased, listening to their stories from school, even playing simple games that filled the house with laughter. Olivia watched this transformation with quiet joy, offering support without intrusion, guidance without interference. She and Yates developed a comfortable routine, sharing coffee on the porch in the evenings after the children were in bed, discussing the day's events and plans for the next. It was during one of these evening conversations, as October gave way to November and the first snow dusted the distant mountains, that Yates finally asked the question that had been on his mind since Thomas raised the issue. How long do you plan to stay, Olivia? She looked up from her knitting a scarf for Sarah in bright blue wool, her expression unreadable in the dim porch light. Are you asking me to leave? No, he said quickly. Quite the opposite, in fact. We've come to rely on you. The children adore you, and He paused, searching for the right words. I value your presence here. Very much. Olivia set her knitting aside, giving him her full attention. I'm glad to hear that. I've grown quite attached to Thomas and Sarah, and to this place. But not to me? The words slipped out before he could stop them, more vulnerable than he'd intended. In the silence that followed, Yates could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. He hadn't meant to be so direct, hadn't even fully acknowledged to himself the depth of his feelings for this remarkable woman who had brought light back into his home and his heart. Yates, Olivia said softly, using his first name with deliberate intimacy. My attachment to you is precisely why I've been wondering if I should seek another position. I don't understand. She sighed, her breath visible in the cold air. It wouldn't be proper. A housekeeper developing feelings for her employer. It puts both of us in an awkward position. Feelings? He leaned forward, hope rising in his chest despite his attempt to temper it. You know very well what I mean, Olivia said, a hint of her characteristic directness returning. I've tried to maintain professional boundaries, but it hasn't been easy. Not when I've watched you rebuild your life day by day, not when I've seen your kindness with your children, your determination to preserve their home, your courage in facing your grief. Olivia, Yates began, but she held up a hand to stop him. Please, let me finish. I came here looking for a position, not complications. I've been on my own for a long time, making my own way. I didn't expect to find a family I wanted to be part of, a man I could admire so deeply. She took a deep breath, her eyes steady on his. But I have. And now I don't know what the proper course is. Yates reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. It was the first time he'd initiated such contact, and the warmth of her skin against his sent a current of awareness through him. The proper course, he said slowly, would be for me to speak to Reverend Collins about posting bans, if you were amenable. Olivia's eyes widened. Yates, are you proposing marriage? Not very well, apparently, he said with a self-deprecating smile. But yes, I am. I love you, Olivia Turner. I didn't expect to love anyone after Margaret. Didn't think my heart was capable of it. But you've shown me that there's room for new love alongside the old, that honoring her memory doesn't mean closing myself off from happiness. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, catching the moonlight. The children adore you, Yates finished for her. Thomas has already suggested I marry you to keep you, and Sarah asks me at least once a week if you're going to be her new mother. A small laugh escaped Olivia, though tears were now streaming down her cheeks. And what do you tell her? That it's up to you, Yates said softly, tightening his grip on her hand. So I'm asking now. Will you stay, Olivia? Not as our housekeeper, but as my wife, as a mother to my children? Will you help me build something new from the ashes of what was lost? For a long moment, Olivia was silent, tears continuing to fall unchecked. Then, with a movement that surprised them both, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was both answer and promise. When they finally parted, both breathless and a little shocked at their own boldness, Olivia whispered, "Yes. Oh, Yates. Yes." The morning they were to release Lucky back into the wild coincided with the first heavy snowfall of winter. The children stood solemn-faced on the porch, bundled in wool coats and scarves, watching as Olivia gently placed the now-grown rabbit in a carrying box. "Are you sure he'll be okay out there?" Sarah asked anxiously. "What if he gets cold? Or hungry?" "He has a warm coat of his own," Olivia reassured her, stroking Sarah's hair. "And he knows how to find food and shelter. Wild creatures have instincts that help them survive." "But he likes us," Thomas protested. "He might want to stay." Yates knelt beside his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes the greatest kindness we can offer is freedom, son. Lucky belongs in the wild, where he can live the life he was meant for." Thomas nodded reluctantly, understanding in his young eyes. "I guess so. But I'll miss him." "We all will," Yates agreed. "But we'll have the memory of how we helped him when he needed us. And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll catch glimpses of him around the property from time to time." They took the wagon to the edge of the woods that bordered the eastern edge of the ranch, a sheltered area where rabbits were known to thrive. The snow had tapered off, leaving a pristine white blanket across the landscape, broken only by occasional tracks of deer and smaller creatures. Yates lifted the box from the wagon and carried it to a small clearing, the children and Olivia following in solemn procession. He set it down gently and opened the lid, then stepped back, taking Sarah's small hand in his and placing his other arm around Thomas's shoulders. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Lucky's ears appeared at the edge of the box, twitching as he tested the air. Slowly, cautiously, he emerged, his dark eyes scanning his surroundings. He took a few tentative hops, then paused, looking back at the humans who had cared for him. "Goodbye, Lucky," Sarah whispered. "Be safe." As if understanding, the rabbit gave one last look at the family, then bounded away, disappearing into the underbrush with a flash of his white tail. Sarah sniffled and Yates pulled her close, lifting her into his arms. "He'll be happy here," he assured her. "I know," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. Miss Turner says we have to let go of things we love sometimes. Yates looked over at Olivia, who was watching them with soft eyes. Not always, he said. Sometimes we're blessed enough to hold on to them. On the way back to the ranch house, the children's melancholy gradually lifted as they spotted animal tracks in the snow, making a game of identifying them with Olivia's help. By the time they reached home, they were laughing again, their natural resilience asserting itself. That evening, after the children were asleep, Yates and Olivia sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him in comfortable intimacy. Reverend Collins says he can perform the ceremony the Sunday before Christmas, Yates said, breaking a companionable silence. If that suits you. It sounds perfect, Olivia murmured, watching the dance of flames in the hearth. The children are excited about having a Christmas wedding. And you? Yates asked, tilting her chin up so he could see her face. Are you having any second thoughts? Olivia's smile was radiant in the firelight. Not a single one, are you? Only about waiting so long, Yates admitted, pressing a kiss to her forehead. If it were up to me, we'd ride into town tomorrow and have it done. Patience, Mr. Xander, Olivia teased, though her eyes darkened with an answering desire. Good things come to those who wait. So they do, he agreed, thinking of how his life had changed in the months since her arrival. From the depths of grief to the promise of new happiness, it was a journey he couldn't have imagined when he'd stood on this very porch, telegram in hand, heart shattered beyond what he thought was repair. The night before the wedding, a fierce blizzard swept across the territory, transforming the landscape into a vast white wilderness. Yates stood at the window, watching the snow swirl in the howling wind, a knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. We may not be able to make it to town tomorrow, he said as Olivia joined him, her hands warm on his back. Then we'll wait until the weather clears, she replied pragmatically. A few days won't matter in the grand scheme of things. Yates turned to face her, taking her hands in his. It matters to me. I want to make you my wife, to make this family official. The children have been counting the days. So have I, Olivia admitted with a smile. But we're already a family, Yates. A piece of paper and a ceremony will make it legal, but it won't make it more real than it already is. He pulled her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, how natural it felt to hold her close. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, she retorted with a playful gleam in her eye. You were just too stubborn to notice at first. Their laughter mingled in the warm air of the ranch house, a sound that had become as familiar and necessary as breathing. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed world of pristine white drifts and crystal-clear blue skies. The temperature had plummeted, but the sun shone with blinding brightness on the snow. Ben and Charlie, Yates's most trusted ranch hands, arrived shortly after breakfast to clear a path from the house to the barn, where the sleigh was stored. It wasn't often used, but Yates had prepared it the previous week, anticipating the possibility of snow on their wedding day. Road to town should be passable, Ben reported as he stomped snow from his boots on the porch. Halstead's men were out at first light with the snowplow. Then we're still getting married today? Thomas asked eagerly, appearing in the doorway with Sarah close behind. We're still getting married today, Yates confirmed, ruffling his son's hair. If your soon-to-be mother is ready. Olivia appeared behind the children, already dressed in her best gown, a deep blue wool that brought out the warmth in her eyes. I've been ready for months, she said simply. The journey to town was slow but steady, the sleigh runners cutting smoothly through the fresh snow as the horses plodded forward with steady determination. The children, bundled in furs and blankets, were wide-eyed with excitement at the adventure. Main Street had indeed been plowed, and as they approached the small white church, Yates was surprised to see several wagons and horses already there, smoke rising cheerfully from the building's chimney. "Looks like we have company," he observed, helping Olivia down from the sleigh. Inside, the church was warm and bright, decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries for the upcoming Christmas holiday. And to Yates's astonishment, the pews were filled with people, townspeople, neighbors, even some of the children's schoolmates and their families. Surprise! Sarah couldn't contain herself any longer, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "We planned a big wedding for you and Miss Turner." "You did?" Yates looked from his daughter to his son, who was grinning with equal pride. "It was mostly Miss Turner's idea," Thomas admitted, "but we helped with the invitations. Ben rode them out to all the neighbors last week." Yates turned to Olivia, who was watching him with a mixture of nervousness and joy. "You did this? For us?" "For you," she corrected softly. "You've been hiding away from the community, Yates. These people care about you, about Thomas and Sarah. I thought it was time to let them back in." Looking around at the familiar faces, some he hadn't seen since Margaret's funeral, Yates was overcome with emotion. There was Mrs. Peterson from the cafe, beaming at him from the front pew, Mr. Lewis from the bank and his wife, who had been Margaret's friend, the schoolteacher, Miss Abernathy, with a group of children who were waving excitedly at Thomas and Sarah. Even Sheriff Davis, rarely seen in church, stood at the back in his Sunday best. "Thank you," Yates whispered, taking Olivia's hand and bringing it to his lips, "for bringing us all together again." The ceremony itself was simple, but deeply moving. Thomas stood proudly at his father's side, while Sarah served as flower girl, scattering dried rose petals saved from the summer garden. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests nearly lifted the roof. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by the community: roast beef and ham, potatoes and winter vegetables, pies and cakes of every description. Music filled the air as a trio of local musicians played fiddle, banjo, and piano, and even Yates, who had never been much of a dancer, found himself whirling Olivia around the floor to the applause of onlookers. "Have I told you how beautiful you are, Mrs. Xander?" he murmured, as they moved together to a slower tune. Olivia's eyes shone with happiness. "Several times, but I don't mind hearing it again." "Beautiful," he repeated, pulling her closer. "Inside and out. I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming territory." "And don't you forget it," she teased, rising on tiptoe to kiss him lightly. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Yates found himself standing with Sheriff Davis, watching as Olivia taught a group of children, including Thomas and Sarah, a circle dance. "You found yourself a remarkable woman there, Xander," the sheriff observed, following his gaze. "I have," Yates agreed, "though sometimes I think she found me, rather than the other way around." Davis chuckled. "That's usually how it works with the good ones." He paused, then added more seriously, "It's good to see you back among the living. After Margaret passed, we were all worried about you. Those children, too." Yates nodded, accepting the implicit criticism without defensiveness. "I was lost for a while. Couldn't see past my own grief to what they needed." "But you found your way back," Davis said, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's what matters in the end." As if sensing they were talking about her, Olivia looked up from the dance, catching Yates's eye across the room. The smile she gave him was full of promise and understanding, a silent communication that needed no words. "Yes," Yates agreed, returning her smile. "That's what matters." The journey home under a star-filled sky was quiet, the children having fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement. Olivia sat close beside Yates as he guided the horses through the snow, her warmth a comfort against the winter chill. "Happy?" he asked softly, not wanting to wake Thomas and Sarah. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. And you? Yates considered the question, taking in the peaceful landscape around them, the weight of his sleeping children against his legs, the presence of the woman who had brought light back into his world. Yes, he said simply. I didn't think I would be again, but yes, very happy. As they approached the ranch house, now their home in truth as well as fact, Yates couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the devastation of loss to the tentative steps toward healing, from the emptiness that had hollowed him out to the fullness of love that now sustained him. Look, Olivia whispered, pointing toward the edge of the property where the woods began. Do you see? In the moonlight, a small shape moved at the tree line, a rabbit, its coat white against the snow, watching their approach with alert attention. Lucky? Yates wondered aloud. Perhaps, Olivia smiled, or just one of his wild cousins. Either way, it's a good omen for our new beginning. As if acknowledging their presence, the rabbit sat up on its hind legs for a moment, ears twitching, before disappearing back into the shelter of the trees with graceful bounds. A good omen indeed, Yates agreed, guiding the sleigh up to the house that now glowed with warmth and welcome in the winter night. Spring came early to Wyoming territory that year, bringing with it a riot of wildflowers across the newly greened pastures and the promise of new beginnings. The Xander Ranch flourished under the combined care of Yates and Olivia, who proved to be not just a loving wife and mother, but a capable partner in the business of ranching as well. Thomas and Sarah thrived in the atmosphere of love and stability that now permeated their home. They still spoke of their mother sometimes, keeping her memory alive through stories and the small traditions Olivia made sure to maintain. But the hollow sadness that had once shadowed their eyes was gone, replaced by the natural exuberance of childhood. On a warm May afternoon, as Yates returned from checking on a newborn calf, he found his family gathered in the yard. Olivia sat on a blanket spread on the new grass, her skirts arranged around her, while Thomas practiced his roping skills on a makeshift target and Sarah wove wildflowers into a crown. The sight stopped him in his tracks, a wave of gratitude washing over him so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. This was what Margaret would have wanted for them, not endless grief, but a continuation of life and love. "Pa," Thomas called, spotting him first. "Come see, I can lasso the post 5 times in a row now." "Miss Olivia, Ma is teaching me to make flower crowns like the ones she made when she was a girl," Sarah added, holding up her creation proudly. Olivia looked up at him, shading her eyes against the sun, her smile as warm as the spring day around them. There was a secret in that smile. One she'd shared with him just that morning, the news that their family would be growing larger by winter, with the arrival of a new baby. "Well done, both of you," Yates said, crossing to join them, his heart full to bursting. He dropped a kiss on Olivia's upturned face, then settled beside her on the blanket, watching as his children returned to their activities with shouts of laughter. Once, he had looked at these same children with empty eyes, seeing only reflections of his loss, reminders of a happiness that had been cruelly snatched away. Now, through Olivia's love and patience, through her gift for finding joy in small moments, and her courage in facing life's hardest truths, he had learned to see them again, truly see them, as the miracles they were. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia asked softly, her hand finding his on the blanket between them. Yates intertwined his fingers with hers, his gaze moving from Thomas's determined face to Sarah's dreamy smile, then back to the woman who had saved them all. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are," he said simply. "How one person can change everything." Olivia's eyes softened with understanding. "Love does that," she agreed. "It changes everything." As if to underscore her words, Sarah abandoned her flower crown and ran to them, throwing herself into their laps with uninhibited affection. Thomas soon followed, And for a perfect moment, the four of them, soon to be five, were wrapped in an embrace that held all the promise of their future together. In the distance, at the edge of the newly greened pasture where wildflowers nodded in the gentle breeze, a rabbit paused in its foraging to watch the human family with curious eyes. Perhaps it was Lucky, returned to visit the people who had once cared for him. Or perhaps it was just one of the many wild creatures that shared this stretch of Wyoming wilderness with the Xander family. Either way, as the sound of children's laughter floated across the spring air, mingling with the deeper tones of their parents' voices, it seemed a fitting accompaniment to the scene. A family healed, a love hard won, and the simple, profound joy of being alive to share it all.